Welcome to the Greatest Play Bracket podcast of the New York Football Giants. It's all brought to you by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. I am John Schmeelk, joined by the voice of the Giants, Bob Papa. As the Giants celebrate, Bob, their 100th anniversary, they're giving their fans a chance to vote. What do you think the greatest play is in Giants history? We broke it up into 16 play brackets, 4 of them. This is the gray bracket. Go place your vote. We'll get to the final 4. We'll have another round of voting, and fans will decide what the greatest play is in New York Football Giants history. And Bob, this is our gray bracket, and we're going to start with a play.
Hold on one second. This is an interesting bracket here because you have an offensive play, number 1, and then number 2, you have a defensive play. Number 3, you have another big offensive play. So we've got a little twist in some of these. I mean, there's some very cool, important defensive plays in Giants history as well in this bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. And believe it or not, I'm taking a look right now, and of the seeds in this bracket, of the first 3, none of them are in playoff games. So I think that's interesting too. No Super Bowls in the first 3 plays. So we'll get through all those and more. Should be a fun competition and go through this bracket. So Victor Cruz, big-time player for the football Giants. Great story. Comes out of nowhere. 2011, Giants trying to make the playoffs. They need a win against the hated Jets. Christmas Eve game, correct? Mm-hmm. And they're backed up at their 1-yard line. They hit Victor Cruz, and he takes care of the rest.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Jets were controlling the game at this point. I mean, the Giants were going backwards offensively. They weren't really doing anything offensively, and the Jets had a little bit of the upper hand as far as their ability to move the ball against the Giants, and the Giants needed something. I mean, and as Eli Manning has said in interviews, we're just trying to throw a little hitch and just give ourselves some breathing room. And then the next thing you know, Cruz gets out of a tackle, jumps over another guy, goes down the sideline, and it's kind of ironic because, remember, Victor had his big breakout game in the preseason of 2010, the first game ever in MetLife Stadium against the Jets. The Jets had no idea who this kid was. He was beating their number 1 corners, and it was pretty cool. I mean, he wasn't even wearing number 80 that rookie season. No. But this gave the Giants a spark. Cruz had this magical run that season. He would go on to have a big catch and run for a touchdown in the postseason against the Dallas Cowboys. But this game has a lot of significance. First of all, it's 99 yards. It's the longest one in Giants history. And when you think about the significance of it, this game was pretty much a playoff game for both the Giants and the Jets because their margin of error was so slim, both teams coming into the game, and with it being a Jets home game, this Cruz thing almost relieved the Giants of a lot of pressure that they were feeling because now they had control. The Jets were reeling a little bit, and from that moment on, the Giants started to take this game over.
And just to reflect a little bit on Victor Cruz, I think this was a good representation of what made him special, Bob. Really good hands, good route runner, sure, but it was his ability to run after the catch, to make plays on short passes that really set him apart as a player. Yeah,
I mean, and, again, he was an undrafted free agent, so he didn't have a 40 time that would get you to a combine. He didn't have some of the metrics to get you drafted. But some guys just play fast, and Victor Cruz was fast when he needed to be fast, and he was fast going down that right sideline and avoiding that last tackler right in front of the Jets bench. And when you look at the replay of the play, you could just see, the long faces and the celebration that just began. It's a number 1 seed for a good reason.
Absolutely, but it's going up against a touchdown in the 1938 title game. Ed Donowski, a 23-yard third-quarter touchdown pass to Hank Soar, accounts for the final points in the Giants' 23-17 victory against Green Bay in 1938. Bob, I know you were in the building for this one, right?
No, I was not there for that. Ed Donowski, he was a fantastic quarterback. When you take a look at his numbers and put them in comparison to what was going on in that era of quarterback play. But, this is very significant. These are the early years of the National Football League, and the Giants were able to add one of their 8 titles, taking on the Green Bay Packers, who were perennial powers as well in the NFL. And Donowski was an accomplished player at quarterback. I don't think people realize how good he was when you take him into context of that era.
All right, let's go to the next matchup, the 8-9. These are always fun. Y.A. Tittle touchdown to Frank Gifford in a 7-touchdown game, October 28th, 1962, sets the record for 7 passing touchdowns in a game for Y.A. Tittle.
Yeah, I mean, Y.A. Tittle was he was one of the best passers in the National Football League at that time. Obviously, he had done amazing things with the 49ers, comes over to the Giants, and people think about, the Giants' running attack, and you think about in the Super Bowl era how a lot of their offense was built on the run game. Well, in this era, with Charlie Connolly first and then Y.A. Tittle second, the Giants were a very open offense as far as the ability to throw and pass the football. And, for Y.A. Tittle to throw 7 in one game and set an NFL record, that's pretty cool stuff. And one Hall of Famer to another Hall of Famer in Frank Gifford.
Yeah, you talk about comparing eras sometimes, and you're like, well, you can't compare the passing games back then to now. You look at some of Y.A. Tittle's stats back then, it's more comparable than you think.
Well, Y.A. Tittle's touchdowns in a season record that he set while with the New York Giants stood until 1984 when Dan Marino broke it. I mean, so his record stood for 20 years for the most touchdown passes in a season. And that's counting the 70s, when in the late 70s, the rules changed where you were no longer allowed to beat up a wide receiver from the snap of the ball, and they got 5 yards, the 5-yard chuck rule. So when you think about what Tittle was able to do, obviously it's Hall of Fame material.
And going in the number 9 seed here, and Bob, I'll editorialize, that's fine. I think this play should be higher on this list. Eric Howard forces a Roger Craig fumble that Lawrence Taylor recovers to set up the deciding field goal in the 1990 NFC Championship game. The Niners are running the clock out here. Without this fumble, Giants aren't going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I think it sometimes gets lost a little bit. You think about Leonard Marshall knocking Montana out of the game. Steve Young comes in the game, but San Francisco still has control of this game, and they have the ball, and the Giants need a play. They need a play. And everybody remembers Lawrence Taylor recovering the ball, but it was Eric Howard who set up the fumble, who knocked the ball out, which led to the Giants kicking the field goal, because the Giants only kicked field goals that day. But they needed to find a way to get the ball back, and Roger Craig was a guy that didn't fumble a lot. San Francisco was obviously a very sound team, and they were on their way to going to a 3rd straight Super Bowl. And Eric Howard, all the Giants championship teams, there are always guys that step up, not just the big-name guys, but there's been so many players that have come up with big plays and big moments, which is why they became championship teams.
I love the radio call at the end of this game where Dick Lynch just sounds so happy. It's over. It's over for the 3-peat.
Yeah, there'll be no 3-peat.
It was fantastic. Love it. All right, let's go to the 5 seed. Antonio Pierce with a great play. This is going back to that Super Bowl 42 2007 NFC title game against the Packers. The Packers scheme up a screen pass. Those Packer teams are great at scheming up screens, and Brandon Jackson's out there. He's got 2 blockers ahead of him. And Bob, we were in the booth. There's just a whole lot of green ahead of him. Then here comes Antonio Pierce, splits the 2 blockers, tackles him, helps stop the Packers, and the Giants win the game.
This is a big statement here, but I think that if Antonio Pierce doesn't make this play, because the Packers had momentum at this point in the game, and they were kind of churning through the Giants, and they were kind of figuring out play calls that were going to work against the Giants. If Antonio Pierce doesn't make this play, I don't know if the Giants win this game. I don't know if they win this game.
I don't think that's a hot take, Bob. I really don't.
Yeah, well, it's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I think this changed momentum in the game. It forced a field goal when it looked like the Packers were getting an easy touchdown. They dialed up the perfect play for what the Giants were in. But it was Antonio Pierce's extremely high football IQ that enabled him to diagnose and read and sense what Green Bay was trying to do to the Giants. And they got 10 of them, but they didn't get one of them. And we talk about Michael Strahan, and obviously, the heart and soul of the Giants and the veteran leader and, the captain and all that other stuff. But Antonio Pierce really was kind of the soul. He was the coach on the field. And for him to identify this in a split second and then be able to split those defenders and get this stop in my opinion, changed the whole game.
Absolutely. And that was Antonio Pierce's superpower, right? He was a guy, 7th-round pick, correct, if I remember? Or was he undrafted? It was undrafted. He didn't have the measurables. He didn't run a great 40. He wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but he could do stuff like this is what made him a difference-making player.
Yeah, I remember he told me he kept a list of all the linebackers. There was 30-something linebackers that were drafted in his class. And, because AP played on a great defense at Arizona, and he would keep them in his locker. I used to see it all the time. He would keep the list in his locker, and every year, as another one of those linebackers washed out of the league, he would cross their name off the list. He had an incredible football IQ, and it was on full display right here because this was one of the greatest plays, in my opinion, in Giants history.
One reason none of us are surprised he turned out to be a pretty darn good coach as well, given his football intellect. Taking on number 12, Andy Robustelli, a sack in the 56th title game against the Chicago Bears. And this is just a way to highlight Andy Robustelli here, Bob, who was one of the greatest Giants in history.
Yeah, number 81, a true gentleman. Obviously had a chance to meet with him in his later years, but he was unbelievable. And, he provided the pass rush in a lot of ways for the Giants. And, we talk about Sam Huff and what he did in the middle and Frank Gifford and all those great players that are on that team. But Andy Robustelli got after the quarterback like nobody's business. And fitting that in the first year in Yankee Stadium in an NFL championship game against the Bears, in which the Giants wound up winning this football game pretty comfortably. Andy Robustelli got a sack in the game, even though sacks were unofficial stats at that point.
No question about it.
Remember, Lawrence Taylor lost a whole bunch of sacks from his rookie season because they didn't count. But, yeah, Andy Robustelli, great player and obviously an impact player, which is why he's a Hall of Famer.
Back to the 6th seed, Bob. Lawrence Tynes' 2007 game winner in Green Bay. The overtime field goal in overtime after that Corey Webster interception to give the Giants the win and send them to the Super Bowl. And it's funny, that's my favorite Giant game I've ever been at. And I think we might have more plays from that title game in our overall bracket than any other game. There's so many moments in that game that's special. And what I remember about that game, Chris Russo, who was doing shows at FN at the time, he was in the booth, and Lawrence Tynes had missed 2 field goals previously. And not close, really. Like these were not close misses. He sets up the field goal. Russo passed me on the shows. Johnny, no chance. And Lawrence Tynes goes out there, whacks it right through the middle, runs right into the tunnel, gets out of there, and the Giants go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and when he had missed the one earlier, TV showed Coughlin, whose face was frozen red, looked like he was kind of yelling at him, but he was actually more like encouraging him, like, just stay in it, stay in it, stay in it. And, I think Coughlin was shocked that Tynes went out there. Tynes just went out there. They just ran out there, the field goal unit.
The Coughlin went to call for it, and Tynes was already going on the field.
And that was the longest kick to that end of the stadium in Lambeau Field in a field goal that had ever been made, 47 yards. I think it's since been eclipsed. But when you think about the conditions and what he was actually kicking, this frozen rock that they called the football at the time, but with the temperatures, in the negative 21 degrees with the wind chill factor, can't get more clutch than this. It's what dreams are made of. It's what every kicker dreams of. It's what every kid dreams of. When you're in the backyard, throws a touchdown to win the Super Bowl, at bat, home run to win the World Series. Well, for a kicker, this is as good as it gets, outside of kicking the winning field goal in a Super Bowl. But considering the circumstances and the hardship that he had went through, because the other thing about it was I was starting to get worried because you had the Bradshaw touchdown run that was called back. You had there were a couple other plays in this game because the Giants had then taken control of the game, but they hadn't put the game away. And you keep saying to yourself, man, if this keeps going, at some point you're going to give Favre one too many chances.
And he's just going to chuck it up. They're going to score a touchdown, but that's what Brett Favre does.
Yeah, someone's going to slip, and Donald Driver's going to go for a touchdown, which is kind of how they scored their first touchdown of the game. So for this thing to go through, pretty significant, and kudos to Lawrence Tynes for doing it. And he didn't do it once, he did it twice, because he did it in an NFC Championship game a couple of years later.
Yeah, he was a guy that he did not let that stuff get in his head. He was very mentally tough. The 2 misses didn't bother him. And I still remember talking to Jeff Eagles. He said after that game, because the Giants punted enough in that game, he said his foot was swollen for days. That's how hard the football was when it comes to the conditions. And to kick it in that situation with that pressure after 2 misses with the ball being frozen. I believe this was pre-K-ball. I don't think K-balls were a thing at this point either. So it was just really tough circumstances, and Lawrence Tynes did an unbelievable job. Good luck, Justin Tuck. Super Bowl 42. Justin Tuck, 2 sacks against Tom Brady in that Super Bowl. Only player in NFL history with multiple sacks and multiple Super Bowls, Bob. Justin Tuck could have easily been the MVP of that Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily a play. It's Justin Tuck in Super Bowls 42 and 46 between the 4 combined sacks, 2 in 42 and then 2 more in 46, and the amount of pressure and the hits that he got on Brady. Obviously, Justin was a huge factor in this. They had that NASCAR package that they would use, and Tuck would start working from the inside with Strahan and OC on the outside. And, every time you got Brady to the ground, it's one less down for him to do damage. Because remember, that season, the Patriots set an NFL record for points and yards and touchdown passes, everything. So the Giants were able to get hits on him, and obviously in Super Bowl 42, Justin Tuck was a huge factor.
All right, let's go to the next matchup, Bob. From one game-winning kick to another, Matt Bahr kicking the game winner against the 49ers in that 1990 championship game right after the aforementioned forced fumble and recovery with Eric Howard and Lawrence Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, all the scores for the Giants in that game were field goals by Matt Bahr. He kicked 5 of them.
Mr. Reliable, man. You always felt like when he went out there to kick it, it was going in.
I think that's one of the few kickers Parcells actually liked was Matt Bahr. And Matt Bahr integrated very well with his teammates, which was interesting too. Very unique man, clutch player, veteran guy.
Not the biggest leg, but they didn't need him to have the biggest leg.
No, and they didn't need a big leg for this kick. But under the circumstances, again, you're in San Francisco. Now, I also got to put it into context. The old Candlestick Park was a baseball stadium that was built, and, the New York baseball Giants got a little bit buffaloed when they moved out west, and they went and they showed the owners of the baseball Giants where this new stadium would be. It's going to be beautiful, Candlestick Point. Well, they took them out there. They took them out there to see the spot of the new stadium sometime around lunchtime when it's warm and nice, not knowing that what it's like in the evening and later in the day, and the fact that the stadium itself, the field level, I think was kind of below sea level, so the water would come up from underneath.
That was a mud bowl.
It was never a nice track. It was, even the 11 NFC Championship game where it had been raining a lot, the surface was a mess. But, for Bahr to do this under those circumstances, trying to knock the Niners out from being a three-peat or going for a three-peat is pretty significant.
No question about it. And it's going up against Stephen Baker. He's the touchdown maker for a reason, Bob. 14-yard touchdown catch with 25 seconds left in the half. It gave the Giants, put them within 2 points in Super Bowl 25 against the Bills.
Yeah, and you see all the guys with the fancy gloves and stuff like that, and Stephen Baker looks like Mickey Mouse, with these big gloves. They were scuba gloves. They were gloves that scuba divers wear. So they weren't even regular football receivers' gloves or anything. And this is an incredible catch in that corner of the end zone, getting both feet in. And it's very significant because the Giants, their game plan is to use the clock, limit the offensive possessions for the Bills, but you got to score some touchdowns here or there. And this one comes at the end of the half. Perfect throw by Hostetler. Great route and catch by Stephen Baker, the touchdown maker. And then, remember, then you have the halftime ceremony, the concert, and then the Giants went on that long drive to start the third quarter. So the Buffalo Bills offensively hadn't been on the field in like over an hour by the time they got their next possession. But the fact that they scored a touchdown and didn't settle for a field goal was big, and Baker made big plays. That's why they call him the touchdown maker. Didn't have a zillion catches in his career, but came up with a lot of clutch plays for the Giants.
All right, let's go to the 3 seed here, Bob. Tiki Barber's 95-yard NFC East clincher. This is New Year's Eve 2005. I just started working the games back in the studio here at WFN for this game. I remember it well. Runs for 95 yards, had a monster game, set the New York Giants record for the longest run, and this was the do it for Wellington Mara and Bob Tisch game.
Yeah, the Giants had lost both of their iconic owners that fall. So this is a very difficult year for the team. Very emotional. emotional for a lot of the players, especially the veteran players who had been around and had gotten to know Mr. Mara and Mr. Tisch and become friendly with them. And I'll never forget Coughlin addressing the team afterwards about this, you guys are the team of record, meaning in the year in which both owners passed away. And Plaxico had a big game in this game. Tiki was, can you say Tiki was blossoming in his second to last year? But if you take a look at Tiki's last 5 years as a running back in the National Football League, arguably the best 5 years of the last 5 years of any running back in the history of the NFL.
And I will stand for Tiki right now. There's an argument that he should be in the Hall of Fame.
He should be in the Hall. Well, he should be in the Hall of Fame. It's you look at his numbers and you look at people that played similar his position, and from that era, and they're as good as anybody's. And again, the last 5 years of Tiki Barber's career are as good as any 5 years of anybody else over that stretch. So this kind of was an exclamation point on just a dominant season for Tiki Barber.
Take it on the 14th seed. Plaxico Burress' Philly OT winner, 31-yard touchdown reception with almost 12 minutes to lapse in overtime. He gave the Giants a 30-24 win in Philly in a game they trailed in the third quarter 24-7. This was September 17th, 2006. This was kind of a Eli trusting Plax play, kind of just flung it up there, made the play, and Plaxico Burress owned the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, the Giants were owning the Eagles at this point. I'll never forget, again, you talk about Eli Manning and his toughness. I think Eli was sacked 7 times in the first half. I mean, he was getting his butt kicked, and the Giants were trailing in the third quarter. And, you know, a subplot to all this is the performance of Amani Toomer in this game. Amani Toomer had one of the most epic games for a Giants wide receiver in Giants history, and he had caught the touchdown pass to get the game into overtime. And you're 100% right. I could still see myself sitting in the radio booth at Lincoln Financial Field, and you see this whole scenario, and you just said to yourself, Plax is winning this route. Like, they can't stop Plax. And the 31-yard touchdown pass, I think it was a lot of redemption for Eli, who had, you know, just taken this big beating, but he hung in there. And it kind of showed the toughness and the grittiness of this football team as they were building toward the following season and that Super Bowl run. But this was more, again, of a maturation of the New York Giants. And to go into Philadelphia and beat them, and the way they came back to do it was pretty cool. And again, Plaxico Burress against the Eagles was like taking candy from a baby. He just dominated them.
From winning in Philly to winning in Dallas in one of the more dominating games by an individual defensive player that I've seen, Jason Pierre-Paul wills the Giants to victory December 11, 2011, blocks Dan Bailey's 47-yard field goal attempt with 1 second left to preserve a 37-34 victory in Dallas that ends a 4-game losing streak. Giants don't win this game. They probably don't make the playoffs that year, Bob. This is one of those kind of must-win type of playoff type games in 2011, and JPP was all over the place in that game, and Dan Bailey at this point was a guy that did not miss field goals. He was automatic, so you had to block it if you wanted to prevent that from going through the uprights, and JPP did it.
Yeah, I mean, he was all over the place in this football game. You know, sacks, hits on the quarterback, against the run. I mean, he was dominant. And you're 100% right. If the Giants lose this game, they're not mathematically eliminated, but for all intents and purposes, they're out because they had to go on this run down the stretch, and they had to beat the Cowboys, knowing that they had the Cowboys one more time at MetLife Stadium at the end of the season. But in order for that game to be significant, they had to win this game first. A split doesn't do the Giants any good against Dallas at this point. And, you know, the other thing about it was the Giants were trailing in this game, and Eli Manning was unbelievable. And the Giants' offense was unbelievable, scoring as many points as they did in a short period of time. But in the end, the Cowboys had the ball and a chance to go win the game. And JPP, you know, as Carl Blank said, you down with JPP. He was a one-man wrecking crew at that point in time. He was as good as they came. He was one of the best players in the National Football League, not only at his position. Remember him running down on kicks in 2010 in kickoff coverage? A superior athlete and This one literally saved the Giants' season.
No question. You mentioned it too. I'll just bring it up. Eli Manning's fourth quarter performances in 2011. You go back and look at the stats. They're almost as good as some quarterbacks for the whole year, just what he did in the fourth quarter in that season.
Right, and what all would have been forgotten if JPP doesn't block the Bailey field goal.
100%. Taking on Hakeem Nicks' wild card touchdown, 72 yards to Hakeem Nicks. This is a little crossing pattern over the middle. Nicks catches it, does the rest, sends the Giants into the divisional playoffs. Longest postseason play in Giants history, tied that record, and longest play in a postseason victory.
And I still think the Falcons are going for it on fourth downs. But they finished with 2 points in that game, didn't they?
And they had a really good offense that year, too.
Bizarre number. Yeah, but the Giants' offense was better, especially when it mattered. And again, I think what people forget about the 11 Giants, because I think they try to put the 07 and 11 Giants together.
Different teams.
But during the course of the 11 season, OC was hurt, Tuck was hurt. The Giants' run game wasn't really that good. But the run game came alive with that Jet game when Ahmad Bradshaw ran over the safety after Victor Cruz had the 99-yard touchdown, and the defense got better. This was a season in which the Giants were carried by the right arm of Eli Manning and these unbelievable weapons at receiver. I mean, Hakeem Nicks was dominant in this game. He had a postseason to remember, one of the most prolific postseasons for a receiver in NFL history. Cruz did his thing, and Manningham, as he did in the Super Bowl, did his thing. But this was as good a receiving core, a three-man receiving core, as maybe the Giants have ever had.
Unbelievable. And again, the passing game really did carry that team for much of the year until the defense caught up and, of course, did a great job against Tom Brady and the Patriots in the Super Bowl that year and along the way in the playoffs as well. All right, Bob, number 2 seed, final matchup in this bracket. I misspoke at the beginning. This is a playoff game, but it wasn't a championship game or a Super Bowl. Jason Sehorn's acrobatic 32-yard interception return touchdown in the 2007 divisional playoff game against the Eagles. But that brief description does not do this play justice, as he basically plays keepy-uppy with himself with the football to keep it off the ground, catches it, and goes back for the score.
Yeah, it's like when you were a kid, you had the balloon, and you just try to keep it up, and it would go somewhere, and you have to dive somewhere. Well, Sehorn did that with a football in an NFL playoff game and then made it a touchdown. Now, we've talked to Jason about this, and he's like, I broke every rule under the sun as far as what you're supposed to do in that situation because, like I missed this and I don't tip this ball, it's going for 6 the other way. So it was a high-risk play. But, Sehorn was such a gifted player and unbelievably athletic, and he had the injuries. And, when he first came to the Giants, we weren't even sure if he was a corner or a safety. He always rose to the occasion in big spots, especially against the premier receivers in the NFL. But this was, even he said it when we talked to him about it, when he watches it, he still has to come to terms with what he did. It was just all instinct, reaction, and obviously a defining moment in helping the Giants get to Super Bowl 35. But again, beating the Eagles. This was a common theme back then, beating the Eagles in the playoff game at Giants Stadium.
And Michael Strahan, I believe, called Jason Sehorn the best athlete he's ever played with, correct?
Yeah, it's a lot of guys that have played with Sehorn have said the same thing. I remember during camp when they would run the gassers. I mean, he would beat everybody by a third of the field. And,
wow.
Back and he would not even be breathing hard half the time. He might just put his hands on his hips and take a couple deep breaths. Other guys would be like dying after like the fourth set. Sehorn was incredible.
And
really
taking
cool.
on the 15 seed here, Bob, and it might be a little hyperbolic to say any week 3 game was essential to a season, but if anyone was, it was this one. This is 2007, week 3. Giants start the year 0-2, giving up, I believe the correct total was
80.
2 million.
Yeah.
80 points in those first 2 weeks of the Cowboys and the Packers, correct? Yeah. And they go take on Washington. It's tight at the end. Giants have a lead. Washington's driving the ball down the field. 1st and goal. Giants get 4 straight stops, finishing with one of the unsung heroes of that season, Kawika Mitchell, tackling Liddell Betts for a 2-yard loss on a 4th and goal at the 1 to complete the goal line stand to give the Giants the win and prevent them from going 0-3, which would have been a really tough hole to dig out of.
Yeah, it would have been tough because it would have been 2 division losses because they had lost the opener in Dallas. It would be 3 conference losses because they lost at home against Green Bay.
I remember they barely made the playoffs in 07. It's not like they walked in.
So, yeah, all this stuff is very significant, and I think this was very symptomatic of that 07 team. And, everybody's questioning Steve Spagnuolo as the defensive coordinator and all the points they had given up the first 2 weeks. But the guys believed. They believed in what he was selling. They believed what he was teaching. They believed in the scheme. And with their backs against the wall here and trying to avoid going 0-3, every man did his job on that play. Whether it was, you name it, whether it was the guys up front,
Freddie Robbins, go through the list.
All of them doing what their job responsibilities were on that play to get their assignment done, for them to get the penetration that they needed to knock Liddell Betts down for a loss. And even the plays leading up to it. It's not like Washington didn't almost score on a couple of other plays, but this was the fourth down play. This was the game. And this game right here flipped the switch for the 07 Giants, made them believers in what was being taught and what was being asked of them could be successful.
Absolutely. And that's your gray bracket, everybody. Always fun going through these plays. It's a ton of fun. Place your vote. Tell us what you think the greatest play is in New York Football Giants history. For Bob Papa, I am John Schmeelk. Thank you for joining us on the Greatest Play Bracket podcast for the New York Football Giants, brought to you by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. Again, go place your vote and check out Giants.com, the Giants app, all of the Giants social media platforms as we continue our coverage and celebrate the Giants' 100th anniversary.